Hey, welcome back to the Pretty Well podcast. I'm Lisa Smith, and today I am really excited to bring our guest to you. Our guest is Dr. John Neustadt. He's a naturopathic doctor. He's also the founder and president of Nutritional Biochemistry, Inc. He earned his naturopathic medical degree from Bastyr University, where he was awarded the Founders Award for both academic and clinical excellence. Dr. Neustadt has published more than 100 medical articles. He's written 4 health and wellness books and now is #1 on Amazon as a best-selling author in osteoporosis. This is such an important topic. I'm really thrilled to be talking about it today. His most recent book, called Fracture Proof Your Bones, A Comprehensive Guide to Osteoporosis, is that #1 best-selling book on Amazon. He's also the editor of a textbook, Laboratory Evaluations for Integrative and Functional Medicine. That has been used all across the US to train and educate physicians using functional medicine with their patients. Welcome, Dr. Neustadt.
Thank you.
Let's talk about what brought you the field of being a naturopathic doctor. It's pretty broad. You and I were talking about being a generalist before we came on here. What has led you to this passion specifically for bone health?
I didn't ask for this. If you would have asked me 20 years ago if I would become an expert in bone health and osteoporosis, I would have had no idea what you're talking about.
Okay.
I was just starting out in practice about 20 years ago and seeing patients in a general practice. So a variety of different conditions, depression, IBS, and yes, some osteoporosis patients or patients with bone loss started to come into the clinic. And I was doing just like most starting docs as I was taught. I was working with my patients for lifestyle changes, diet, exercise. I was counseling them on medications, dietary supplements, and their bone density was going up. So I was happy and they were happy. My mother-in-law had osteoporosis at the time. As anybody in the field knows, treating family is a challenging dynamic. So she wasn't officially a patient, but I was helping her with some recommendations, diet, lifestyle, exercise, integrative approaches. And her physician had her on Fosamax, standard of care, first-line therapy, recommended almost anyone. And her bone density was going up. So her physician was happy, I was happy, she was happy. And then she tripped on a throw rug and broke her hip. I thought to myself, something is wrong with this picture, because by that objective measure, that bone density test, which is almost exclusively what is tracked and monitored with bone health, by that measure, she should have been protected and she wasn't. So I dove into the research and I started to try and ask questions and understand what's really going on. What is the value of the test? What is the real risk here? Because the real risk is not a number on a test. It's whether or not somebody breaks a bone. And I was shocked to discover that even 20 years ago, a bone density test predicts less than half of people with osteoporosis who will fracture. For a woman with osteoporosis, it only predicts 44% of them who will fracture and only 21% of men. And every medical organization that has looked at this issue has correctly concluded that fracture risk depends on factors largely other than bone density. It's just one piece of a much larger puzzle. Yet despite that, it was then and it still is today almost the only thing that's talked about with patients.
Right, for sure. So what happened? Where did you go from that? What did you learn and where did that take you?
Well, what I started to learn was that there is a lot of research about how holistic approaches, functional medicine approaches, diet, lifestyle, exercise, even community connection can help reduce the risk for fractures, osteoporosis, and all-cause mortality. And working with patients with nutritional medicine and trying to find targeted approaches for bone health using dietary supplements is that the products that I really needed didn't exist. And many products on the market had doses or nutrients that had some support research for them. The products on the market didn't have the doses that were used in the clinical trials and shown to work. And still to this day, there are companies that tout the benefits for their product, but then they use a dose of a nutrient that is less than what was used in the clinical trial and never shown to work in that dose. So I created a company to create those solutions, Nutritional Biochemistry Incorporated, or MBI. One of the earliest products I created was for bone health, to promote healthy bone density and to maintain bone strength. I've continued to innovate from there. Beyond that, it's become my passion to educate people. I speak at conferences. I'm headed to give a ground rounds talk in North Carolina soon on bone health and osteoporosis. So I lecture at medical conferences. And as you mentioned, I write books and a lot of articles to get the word out, because patients still have to be their best advocate. Most doctors are not trained in how to properly assess and treat this condition. I found that even in patients who are eligible for bone density tests, that's that Medicare age patient, 65 and older, that's the highest risk category for osteoporosis. 95% of them are not getting screened with a bone density test. So most people who are eligible aren't even getting screened. And then there's an entire group of people younger than that who are at risk for bone loss, and doctors have no idea. One of the most flagrant examples that I have, and I think shocking, is that some of the most common medications that doctors are prescribing are damaging bone, creating bone loss, and creating fractures. I'll give you a couple of examples.
Yeah. Let's talk about it.
Antidepressants. The most common category of antidepressants are the selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors, Prozac, Lexapro. There are serotonin receptors on bone. And when you artificially raise serotonin, it activates the bone destroying osteoclast cells and it makes them live longer. Osteoporosis is a condition of imbalance where the destructive forces are winning. Our job is to try and rebalance the system and move it in the direction of creating healthy bone, maintaining healthy bone to keep people strong. With the selective serotonin reuptake inhibitor antidepressants, they are such powerful bone destroyers that research has shown that for every 19 women taking an SSRI for 1 to 5 years, we now expect one of them to break a bone.
Oof. Wow.
And people are taking them at younger ages. They're taking them long term, 3, 5, 7, 10 years. And that most doctors are unaware that is happening to their bones, and they're putting their patients at risk. Proton pump inhibitors is another problem. Acid blocking medications. When you are taking one of those acid blocking medications, a proton pump inhibitor, it is destroying bone by different mechanism than the serotonin reuptake inhibitors. And so what's happening when people are taking those long term, which they do now, they're available over the counter. The first FDA warning letter for proton pump inhibitors and fractures went out in 2010. So this is not a new issue. Now we know that when people take them continuously, their hip fracture risk goes up more than double, almost triple, depending on the situation, than people not taking them. One of the challenges is when you go to see a physician who prescribes an osteoporosis medication for that, there's very little research on osteoporosis medications and their use in people other than people with postmenopausal osteoporosis. The vast majority of the research is on women with postmenopausal osteoporosis. So when you're talking about other mechanisms by which people are losing bone, oftentimes there are no clinical trials showing that the medication also works in those patient populations. And proton pump inhibitors are a great example of that. What happened is because these bisphosphonates like Fosamax are first-line therapy, well, that's what physicians naturally are prescribing. Then somebody decided, despite the fact there was no clinical trials on it, again, use it for one condition, somebody has bone loss, let's give it to them. And what they found when they started looking at clinical trials or running clinical trials on that patient population is that when people take a proton pump inhibitor plus Fosamax, their risk for fracture is higher. It actually increases their risk for fractures beyond people just taking the Fosamax alone. That is a stark warning and a realization that it's really important that people understand if they have this diagnosis, what their options are, and the important questions to ask their doctors to make sure that they're getting the best recommendation possible and they can make the best informed decisions for their health. In my book, I walk people through how to create holistic bone health programs for themselves. At the end of many chapters are questions, are take action sections, some with questions to ask your doctor, like with the medications, to make sure the medication is actually a good choice for you, because it may be, but it also might not be.
Those medications, Fosamax, can be brutal as well, regardless of your other medications in your medicine cupboard. They can be pretty brutal on muscle health, on all kinds of different aspects of health. But what I hear you saying, this is really interesting. PPIs are one of the most largely prescribed medications, as are SSRIs.
Mm-hmm.
So now what you've said is we know that both of those significantly negatively impact bone health. Now, imagine the number of people on both. They've got stress and anxiety, they've got reflux, so they're on PPIs, they're on SSRIs. And then you throw in Fosamax, which is shown to lay down more bone, but my understanding, and you are the expert, correct me if I'm wrong, but it can make those bones more brittle. That sounds like a perfect storm to be on multiple medications, which many people are on. And you think you're helping your bones, and in the long run, you end up like your mother-in-law, who has now ended up with a hip fracture.
Yes. So the medications is an interesting topic, and they are obviously first line therapy. But if you ask the clinicians, how compliant does somebody need to be to get the benefits, and how well does it reduce fracture risk? Most of them aren't going to know. So what we're looking at is, in order to get the benefits of the osteoporosis medication, you have to be able to take it 80% of the time or more. And we know with the bisphosphonate category medications like Fosamax, a third of patients, even when they get the prescription, never fill it. And then those that do, over 50% discontinue it within a year. And you have to take these medications for multiple years. And most patients, 60% after the first year, drop out and stop taking the medications. You have to take the oral bisphosphonates while standing up on an empty stomach. You got to stay standing for 30 minutes because it can cause damage to your esophagus. And then there are all the side effects that you alluded to that can be really difficult for people. One of the more rare side effects, but to me, it's a little absurd that we would be prescribing a medication that actually increases somebody's fracture risk, is that the osteoporosis medications, some of them, not all of them, but the bisphosphonates definitely can increase somebody's risk of what's called an atypical femoral fracture. Those medications work by poisoning osteoclasts, those cells that break down bone. And they allow the osteoblasts, the cells that build up new healthy bone, to continue to work. The challenge is that you need a healthy mixture of both cells. The osteoclasts play an important role of breaking down old, worn out bone. And then the osteoblasts are building new, healthy bone. In fact, every 10 years, you have complete bone turnover. Your bones are brand new about every 10 years. And when you're poisoning the osteoclast, what happened is you've got the old worn out bone that's staying around, and you've got new bone being created on top of that in an unnatural pattern. An atypical femoral fracture can happen when there's no trauma. There are stories in the literature of one woman who was watering a plant on a step stool, just stepped off, didn't fall, didn't lose her balance, stepped down on the ground, turned to walk away, and her leg fractured. And then what happens, because you've damaged the osteoclast, you have a longer time to heal. There's delayed healing if you fracture. Another challenge with oral bisphosphonates is that when you come off of them, you're going to be recommended another medication. Or even if you're recommended Prolia, denosumab, or Xgeva is what it's known by first, or Tymlos, any of the other medications, when you're done with that, there's going to be sequential therapy, and they're going to say, now we want you to go on a bisphosphonate. So it's important to understand the entire sequence of the treatment and what they're recommending. And that's why, for me, every question about this needs to be about fractures. The question around the medications that are important to me to ask are, does this medication reduce fractures in somebody with my medical history and my diagnosis? Many conditions increase somebody's risk for osteoporosis, irritable bowel disease, autoimmune diseases. There's a long list. And not all medications have been studied in that population and been shown to reduce fractures. Some have been studied to improve bone density. But even the American Academy of Clinical Endocrinology says that the increase in bone density when you take an osteoporosis medication does not mean that it's reducing your fracture risk.
Mm-hmm.
And in fact, I discovered earlier this year when I was getting ready for another medical talk that, shockingly to me, failed therapy for any medications, meaning we're using this medication and it's not working, we need to try something else. Failed therapy for osteoporosis medications is defined as 2 or more fractures while on the medication. So you can actually fracture multiple times, and technically you still haven't failed therapy. There's no obligation or pressure for a doctor to try and change that, although I think most people do. But that recognition that the bone density improvement doesn't even show that your fracture risk is being decreased is really important, because again, it's that test that's being monitored and the doctor's saying, well, you're protected, it's going up, but the research doesn't show that.
Such a good point. I just want to repeat that point for our listeners. You made it twice, but it's important. Our diagnostic tool that we use primarily is a bone density test. If we're seeing bone loss on a bone density test, we're told we're at risk. The Fosamax and other medications meant to improve bone density may, in fact, improve bone density and are shown clinically too, but that does not equal a lower risk in fracture.
Not
So
necessarily.
really important to know. I have had so many people reach out to me and say, I've been diagnosed with osteopenia. You and I talked about this before coming on. Or I've been diagnosed with osteoporosis. What do I do? I don't even want to go on the medications. Fair
Right.
enough. There's enough skepticism from the population to say, I don't even think I want to do that. I've watched other people go on it and not have the results they were hoping for. So, what has your research shown? What can people do? I know it's multifactorial. I know there are so many pieces, but let's just start with, you have this wonderful book, and of course, I'm going to recommend the book. I'm going to get it myself. But let's talk about what can our listeners start to take away from our conversation that they can do at home.
So first of all, I do want to just clarify about the medications, just one important point, because there is a place for medications clinically, and I don't want to demonize them and say they are worthless and useless.
Fair enough.
There's a distinction between primary fracture prevention and secondary fracture prevention. If you've never broken a bone with osteoporosis, what the research shows is that all of the osteoporosis medications, except intravenous Zometa, only reduce vertebral fracture risk. They don't reduce hip fracture risk.
Oh, wow.
The hip fractures are the most dangerous fracture with osteoporosis. If you're a woman and you have osteoporosis and fracture a hip, there's up to a 36% chance that you're going to be dead within a year. Yeah. Every 30 seconds, someone around the world is breaking a bone from osteoporosis. And those who do, about 50% who fracture a hip never regain their pre-fracture level of mobility and pain-free life. And those that do still need help years later with basic activities of daily living, like dressing themselves, going to the bathroom. In fact, a woman's risk of an osteoporosis fracture is equal to her combined risk of breast, uterine, and ovarian cancer. Understanding the benefit for vertebral fractures versus hip fractures is important, and I go over that in my book. If you've had fracture already with osteoporosis, you're trying to prevent it again, a second or third one, then you have more options with medications that are more effective at reducing your risk for both vertebral and hip fractures. So it's really about understanding those nuances, which your doctor likely is not going to understand.
Thank you for clarifying that for us. So there are applications to medication, but let's talk about how people can be empowered on their own.
Yes, there are various ways, and I like to think about what are the foundations of health and how can we build those foundations. The first thing I talk to patients about is that this didn't happen overnight. It's biology doesn't reverse itself immediately, and it's going to take years to build the bone back, make it healthy, and keep it strong.
Mhm.
So diet and exercise. Mostly doctors will recommend that. They'll say, well, eat calcium and exercise. Make sure you get enough vitamin D through sunlight, and there's vitamin D in some foods as well. But what does that mean? Rarely ever do people get detailed help on what does that look like? What does a bone healthy diet look like? What it looks like is the Mediterranean style dietary pattern. It has been studied for 50, 60, 70 years. There's never been any negative conclusions or research on it. It's essentially a plant forward diet with plenty of whole grains, lean proteins, and followed in the Mediterranean region, as it implies. Southern France, Italy, Spain, Greece. It's been linked to reductions in osteoporosis, 20% reduction, not only in osteoporosis risk, but also a reduction in hip fracture risk, linked to reduction in dementia, cardiovascular disease, cancer, death from cancer, all-cause mortality, obesity, diabetes. The list just goes on and on. Like I said, no negative stuff I've ever seen.
Mm-hmm.
Now, people can recommend that in their food pyramids and their cookbooks, and there are resources out there on the internet. But one of the challenges is the opposite of the standard American diet. So people don't understand, how can they transition into eating that way? What does that look like? The standard American diet currently is about 60% of the calories from ultra processed foods, packaged foods. And those are also linked to osteoporosis as well as many other diseases. And so I walk people through in the book, how many grams of total dietary fiber should you be getting a day? And I shoot for 30. You get 30 grams of total dietary fiber a day. And where is that found? It's found in fruits and vegetables. And the fiber also feeds and helps feed the gut microbiome to support a healthy gut microbiome. And then there's the protein requirement. And this is what is missing frequently in people with whom I have conversations and work, even when somebody seems to be doing everything right. I mean, they're taking the right supplements, following a healthy diet, exercise, and their bone density isn't going up. And despite the limits of the bone density test, I do think people should get it. It's one thing that should be tracked.
Okay.
What happens is they tend not to be eating enough protein. The amount of protein people eat can account for 2 to 4% of bone mineral density. And it's also the raw material for building bone collagen and other proteins in bone. There are 180 to 200 proteins in bone, in addition to collagen. It's highly protein dependent, like muscle is. As we age, the amount of protein we need increases. It's a phenomenon called anabolic resistance, and it's been studied for muscle. And the amount you need to maintain healthy muscle increases as you get older. So the USRDA, that baseline amount, is insufficient. So I recommend people take their body weight in pounds and multiply it by 0.6. That's the minimum number of grams of protein they should be consuming a day. And try and get 10% more than that.
A little more than half your body weight in grams.
Correct.
Right.
0.6 times your body weight in pounds.
Okay.
And that's the dietary piece. Transition into that slowly over time in a way that's comfortable, because it often requires shopping differently, using different spices, cooking differently. If you have a family, it changes how they're eating, having different snacks in the house. Radical, major changes done quickly tend not to be sustainable. You only have to make very small changes consistently. A small change done consistently over time can completely change the trajectory of your life.
Yes.
Making these incremental changes in a way that's comfortable for them, but sticking with it, can really transform somebody's health, including their bone health. And then with exercise, there are a lot of options. Even just walking 7,000 to 7,500 steps a day has been associated with a 50 to 70% reduction in all-cause mortality. Now, people say lift weights, do weight-bearing exercise, go to a gym, and that's great if that's what you like. But the best exercise is, first and foremost, exercise that is safe, but also one that somebody's going to do consistently. You need to be consistent over time with this. And if you start doing some exercise and it gets boring to you after a while, you don't have to stick with it. You can switch. There are tons of options: walking, lifting weights, gardening, taking classes. Make it social with a friend. Involve that. There are lots of things that you can do, but moving your body, getting some weight bearing exercise, even if it's just body weight, is really important because 95% of fractures occur because somebody falls. So anything we can do to reduce their risk of falling reduces their risk of fractures and other fall related injuries. And in
Mm,
fact, the goal with exercise really is strength, stability, and mobility. How to
mm.
age well.
Right. Right. Yeah. And what I hear you saying, just the importance, as you just said, strength, stability, and mobility, the importance of improving balance, but also as we women are very aware that lifting weights helps build bones. So can you just unpack that a little bit?
Resistance exercise has been incredibly well studied for bone health, for muscle mass, for healthy aging.
Mhm.
And the important thing to understand is form is everything. If you
Mm,
have the wrong form, if you try and lift too heavy a weight too quickly, it becomes dangerous. You can injure yourself. You could strain a muscle, you could strain a joint. And so you want to do this in a measured, methodical way. I recommend getting a trainer who knows what they're doing and not going to overload the joints, not going to overload the muscles. Research has shown that you want to get to your 80% max weight about what you can lift. 80% of what you can lift, you can do as many reps as you can until
mhm,
muscle failure, until fatigue.
mhm,
Now, that's great. And you can do that in the gym. There's powerlifting. There's good research called the Lift More study that showed an improvement in bone density, but more importantly, reduction in falls and fractures based on that research. But it's also important to make sure that you've got some stretching in there, that
mhm,
you are doing some movements that are natural movements instead of just isolating, one, two muscles, and
mhm.
doing it in a way that's a program that is going to help you track your results and incrementally increase your weight in a way that is safe.
Where the benefit of the trainer comes in because they're tracking how you're improving. There's a great app called ClassPass. I love it because I work out with a trainer twice a week. ClassPass allows me to join different types of gyms. So I do yoga at one place, I do bar at another place, I do Pilates at another place, but I don't have to join all those places. I can just, so now made my own schedule based on having ClassPass and a trainer, which has helped those three things, strength, stability, and mobility, because they're all different. So they're all trying something new. It's progressive. That's a great point for your patients and for our listeners that something like that provides so much flexibility and then becomes financially doable.
And with lifting weights, I want to make sure people understand that if you have a diagnosis of osteoporosis, different exercises can increase your risk for fractures. That's why
Oh,
it's important to do this with your eyes open. Make sure you work with somebody who understands what they're doing and can modify for you. And I'll give you an example. There's a study that came out years ago in the 1980s. There have been very few studies actually on exercise and fractures. There are studies that look at bone density, but not fractures as the outcome. And the
mhm.
one that I found showed that for women doing the exercise, they had them do three different exercises: extensions, like laying on the ground and leaning back, sit ups, crunches, flexion, sitting in a chair and doing those as well, combination of the two. And what they found is that the women who did the flexion exercises, where they're like doing sit ups, they had the highest risk of fractures. And I think it's because we sit pretty hunched over most of the day, and it just puts more and more pressure on that, front of the spine, the anterior segments of the vertebra,
Yeah.
those bones. So I think that's a caution. And I review that in my book because I want people to understand that not all exercise is safe when you have a diagnosis of osteoporosis.
Wow, I appreciate you pointing that out because that would go against intuition in like that would be counterintuitive. I would think by strengthening my core using those exercises, I'm just stabilizing my spine even more, but I can see that could be a problem. So that's really helpful. Thank you for pointing that out. One other thing is even if you're working with a trainer, always listen to your body. I overlifted several months ago and I ended up with a hip bursitis, which is no fun. That's no fun. So always pay attention to your body. And if it feels like it's too much, we tend to talk ourselves out of things and say, oh, I'm good, I'm fine.
So
Well,
do men. We do
yeah.
the same thing. And
Yeah,
I've
oh,
gotten
that's
injured because of that. I've
same.
tried to push through.
And we think that there's a
Yeah,
long-term benefit that we're building muscle. If our muscles can't keep up, our joints will get recruited and then we're doing damage. So
exactly.
that's what I learned the hard way.
And now when I exercise, I move so slowly because when you move slower, you're stressing the muscles. So it's time under tension. When you're lifting weights or even if it's just body weight, what you're doing is you're putting tension on the muscle, you're stressing the muscle.
Mhm.
And when you move, it doesn't matter how slow or fast you move, the results in terms of improving muscle mass, improving strength occur depending on how much time you're putting under that tension under. So
Great point.
you can have a soup can, and if you move slowly and do enough reps, you're going to get to failure where you
Mm,
can't do another one. So
right.
moving slowly is getting the benefits for the exercise. It's
Hmm.
not what most people are doing when you look around, but their form is not that great most of the time.
Hmm.
And they're putting themselves at increased risk for getting hurt, for injuries. But now moving slowly, even if it's just if you're doing a curl, for example, slowly counting to 3 on the up motion and then resistance on the way down, slowly counting to 3 or 4 or 5 on the way down. Slow and steady wins the race.
Such a good point. I think just this image of if you think about it and think going fast is cheating, you're using momentum and you could be injuring yourself. So there's really, you see people in the gym and they're like, oh, I'm getting my biceps. You're not getting your biceps done. You're
Yeah.
getting maybe a sweat going, but you're not really stressing that muscle, which is going to lead to muscle and bone improvement. So let's talk about nutrients. My favorite recommendation for people is a Mediterranean diet. I am a dietitian, so Mediterranean all day long, and it's not a diet. I hate diet.
I don't like the term with it, but that's what it's called. It's a
It's
pattern, it's a way of
right.
eating.
It's the
Yeah.
Mediterranean lifestyle, right? And
Yeah.
so it makes the most sense. That's how we get our best phytonutrients, our best
Yeah.
nutrition. We're mindful of protein. As a rule of thumb, if anyone hates math and doesn't want to do the math for your protein, I say aim for about 100 grams a day. We don't, it might be a little high for some people, but it's a decent ballpark. Let's take it down now to micronutrients. Let's talk about because what's the first thing someone's going to say to you or to me? I have, my bone density, I'm not happy with the results. My doctor told me to take calcium. Well, we
Yeah.
know that if calcium doesn't have cofactors, meaning vehicles to get it into the bone and the teeth, then it's going where it shouldn't be going. Let's talk about some of those other nutrients that are absolutely necessary to get that calcium where it's supposed to be to do its job.
I love this question because there's so much misinformation and misunderstanding out there. And it's really important for people, in my opinion, to be focused on what is the goal.
Hmm.
So, what is the goal with taking nutrients as dietary supplements?
Hmm.
What is the goal with following a Mediterranean diet? What is the goal with any recommendation with osteoporosis? Yes, you want to see your bone density improving, but most importantly, the most important question that I ask when I'm reviewing the research on nutrients is,
Hmm.
has the nutrient been shown in clinical trials to maintain strong bones as indicated by fewer fractures in volunteers?
Great
And
point.
people talk about all these cofactors. Oh, you got to have magnesium with calcium. You've got to have boron. You've got to have X, Y, and Z.
Okay, good.
I've asked for decades. If somebody says calcium has to be with magnesium or you don't get the benefits, I asked, where'd you see that? Was there a citation that was provided? Can you please send me the study? I've looked. I've yet to find any studies supporting that.
That's interesting. I
And
assumed that you needed magnesium, vitamin D, boron, strontium. Let's
so,
unpack it.
so just like to maintain health in any other part of the body, you need a mix of nutrients for bone health as well. But taking a nutrient as an isolated nutrient in a dietary supplement is not the same as nutrients that are in food that
Mm,
are mixed with many other nutrients in this delivery system, which is food that comes out of the ground.
hmm.
Right. So you see a lot of the epidemiological or nutrition research out there is done using food frequency questionnaires. So
Hmm.
magnesium is a great example. And a food frequency questionnaire, for your listeners, in case they're not familiar with it, is you get a group of people and give them a bunch of questions of how much have you eaten of X, Y, and Z over a certain time period. And what the research also shows is people tend to lie about what they eat, and not even intentionally necessarily. They tend to overemphasize the healthy foods they eat
Yeah,
and underemphasize the unhealthy foods that they eat. And so
I do
there,
that.
it's a known limitation of that methodology, of that research methodology. So what
Mhm.
happens is people will say consuming magnesium, that automatically means it was a dietary study. It wasn't a dietary, isolated dietary supplement study. So
Okay.
consuming magnesium, yes, is associated with better bone health, right? Is associated with strong bones.
But
And
it
in
comes in
fact,
a package of food.
with food, right?
Mhm.
If you look at the clinical trials on magnesium, there are no clinical trials on magnesium as a dietary supplement showing that it reduces fractures.
I didn't know that.
There's only one study from the 1990s, and it showed that it improved bone density, but they didn't look at fractures as an outcome.
Hmm.
And in fact, there are research on other nutrients that show over 70% reduction in fractures.
Wow.
So I would prefer that people get their magnesium from food. You see these formulations that are out there on the market, and they've got magnesium and strontium and silica and
Mhm.
all these different things. We can talk about strontium, boron. But question is, I have for people is that's great, but are you getting your money's worth? It's
Mm.
probably better to get most of those nutrients from food because
Mm.
they've not been shown to actually reduce fractures in clinical trials. There are only 4 nutrients that have been shown to reduce fractures in dietary supplements:
What are they? Swing back to magnesium in a sec, but what are those four nutrients?
calcium and vitamin D by about
Mhm.
18 to 23%,
Okay.
a specific form of vitamin K2 called MK4. Vitamin
Oh.
K is a category of nutrients. Most
Mm.
commonly in dietary supplements, people will see the MK7 form of vitamin K2. There's
Didn't know.
another form called MK4.
Okay.
MK4 is the only form of vitamin K, whether it's K1 or any subtype of K2, the only form in supplemental form shown to stop bone loss, both in postmenopausal women with osteoporosis, medications like prednisone, androgen deprivation therapy, but also improve bone density, but most importantly, to maintain strong bones by over 70% fewer fractures in clinical trial volunteers. MK7, in contrast, has never been shown to stop bone loss. It's only been shown to slow it down. In one study, the women taking it had faster bone loss at the hip than the women not taking it. There are no studies with fractures as the outcome.
Okay.
And it was that research that got me to start creating dietary supplements because I needed that form of vitamin K2, MK4, 45 milligrams per day in divided doses to replicate it as close as I could to the clinical trials
Yep.
for my mother-in-law, for other
Mhm.
people I was working with, not as a medication, but as a nutrient shown to powerfully promote bone health and move pathways towards healthier bones so that the physiology of the bone can do what it wants to do anyway. And that is support bone health and maintain strong bones. We see with that nutrient combined with vitamin D3, it's synergistic. In clinical trials, you get improvements in bone density. Most importantly, those clinical trials show that bone strength is maintained by those fewer fractures.
Bone density is all well and good, but at the end of the day, what we really care about is that we don't break our bones.
Correct.
Truly. What is the goal? You asked, what is the goal of a nutritional lifestyle or
Yeah.
supplements? It's that we stay healthy and mobile and we don't break things. That's what's the fourth one that's been clinically studied as a supplement?
Strontium,
Strontium.
but
Okay.
I don't recommend it.
Very good to know because some of the bigger name
Yeah.
supplements that are clinically shown to reduce osteoporosis um, include strontium. So that's really good to know. Let me go
So,
back. I want to hear about that, but let me go back
okay.
just real quickly about the MK4. How hard is that to find? I know you have developed your own supplements. Is it uncommon to find that in a D3 K2 supplement combo? Does it tend to be the MK7 more, or do you just have to look?
My products still today are the only ones that have the MK4 with D3 in it.
The only ones.
I've created 3 different versions of it because not everybody needs the same amount of calcium.
Wow,
So
very.
that's another thing too, is that a lot of people are taking too much calcium. They really don't need that
Mhm.
much.
Mhm.
I've created 3 different versions. One that's calcium free, has no calcium in it. But yes, my line, OsteoK is the product line, and they have it's OsteoK, OsteoK minis, and Osteo MK4. The only MK4, 45 milligrams, again, in divided doses is important, taking at least twice a day with meals with the D3 already in it. And
Is
not
that
only that, we guarantee it. I mean, we've worked so long with these nutrients, and I've done so much research on this, and my company now guarantees within 6 months of taking any of my 3 bone support products, bone density will stabilize or improve, but more importantly, it'll maintain bone strength, meaning that if somebody breaks a bone, we'll refund their money for all qualifying purchases between their bone density tests.
wow, that is awesome. How would someone know what level of calcium they need if they need it at all?
The USRDA is 1,200 milligrams per day
Mm-hmm.
for women.
Mm-hmm.
For men, it's 1,000 milligrams per day. The
Okay.
average American woman, if you're just eating like an average person in the US, gets 800 milligrams of calcium in her diet.
Okay.
And what's often missed with the recommended daily allowance, the amount that's recommended people eat, is that that's from all sources, diet plus dietary supplements. A lot
Mm-hmm.
of times doctors will say, take 1,200 milligrams of calcium as a dietary supplement or 1,500 milligrams. It doesn't take into account their diet at all. The
Mm-hmm.
reality is that getting more than 1,200 milligrams of calcium doesn't support bones any better. You don't get any additional benefits from that. And then you also can run into some risks of toxicity. For the average American woman, getting 400 milligrams of calcium as a dietary supplement, which is in my Osteo-K minis, is enough to get her within that 1,200 milligram per day range. The average American man consumes 1,000 milligrams of calcium per day. Most men don't need additional calcium.
I see. So you have it.
Correct.
Okay, right. So pretty much take a look at your diet and how much are you getting from dietary sources such as dairy? What are your thoughts on vegetable sources? Is it bioavailable? So from spinach, broccoli, other plant sources, is it as bioavailable or how do you count that?
So, look, I think that it's an overall dietary pattern. I discourage people eating, a rainbow a day of fruits and vegetables, varying their diet. There are some foods that have phytates in them. I think that might be what you're alluding to. That
Mhm.
that may decrease the amount of calcium, but there are no studies that have said, okay, if somebody eats, you know, a half a cup of spinach per day and something else with phytates, does their bone density not go up? Is that counteract any of the benefits? That research just doesn't exist. People can make themselves a bit crazy
Mhm.
by obsessing over all of those details. And I think that it's better to enjoy your food, enjoy
Mhm.
your meals. We do know that with spinach, calcium is more absorbable if it's cooked. Maybe cook your spinach, but do you have to do it all the time? No. Are
Mhm.
you exclusively eating spinach? No. You're eating other things too.
So
So,
just to ballpark it and just say I might be getting this much calcium through my diet, so I will choose this much as a supplement.
that's how I approach it.
That's how I like to approach all dietary things. Let's ballpark it because you're eating to live, not living to eat. So let's,
Exactly.
okay. And then this is just a technical question, but you do the divided doses for the MK4 because you only absorb so much at one time. Is that why you do divided doses, or is it better to keep blood levels stable, or what's the,
That's what the clinical trials did.
okay, that's
So
where the,
there's a thing called a half life. So,
Mhm.
how long a nutrient, same for medications, how long before 50% of that is metabolized and used?
Mhm.
The half life of MK4 is shorter than the half life of MK7. MK7 lasts longer in the blood, which is one of the marketing things that companies say. It has a longer half life, that therefore it's better than MK4. But that's a laboratory test. It has nothing to do with whether it works or not. It may be associated with efficacy in some ways, in some instances, but definitely not in this, because MK7 doesn't stop bone loss. When you look at the clinical trials between MK4 and MK7, there are over 25 clinical trials on MK4. If you look at PubMed and you search for MK7 and bone, there are only about 5 clinical trials. MK4 has been much better studied when it comes to clinical outcomes with humans, not just in a laboratory.
Right.
The clinical trials with MK4 did dosing 3 times a day. It was 15 milligrams 3 times a day. But when I was creating my products, I thought compliance is hard. It's challenging for people to do something 3 times a day for years. So
Yeah.
I calculated based on the half-life, did I think that I could get the blood concentrations up high enough by doing it twice a day, 22.5 milligrams twice a day with meals, because when there's some fat in the food, in a meal, it helps increase absorption.
Mm-hmm.
And I believed I could. So I created the products. And in fact, we do. I am getting those improvements on testing. People are getting them when they take it, so much so that now we have the guarantee.
Tell us how your mother-in-law fared.
She did great. She continued taking Osteo-K. She called it, she liked it. I told her she didn't need all that calcium, but she wouldn't listen to me. But she kept taking the higher calcium one, the Osteo-K instead of the Osteo-K minis.
Oh,
And she did great. She lived to 93, and she would have done much better had she also exercised and eaten healthier. People make their choices.
hey, she lived to 93.
She passed away last year.
Oh, well, I'm sorry to hear
Thank
that.
you. She had a great life, a long life. She was an amazing woman, definitely missed, but it happens to everybody.
The
We all have to know.
inspiration for what you do, which is pretty amazing.
Yeah.
So let's talk about, there are two things before we wrap up. I want you to share some highlights from your book with our listeners so that they know that, yeah, this is for me. I should definitely be getting.
Is it okay if I talk about strontium?
I would like that. Yes. Actually, I was going to ask you that, but I also know that we were talking about time a little while ago before we got on. So yes, please talk about strontium.
And I think it's important because it is being heavily promoted out there. And I made an unambiguous statement that I advise against it.
You did.
So why? Yes, strontium has been shown to reduce fractures in clinical trials, which is the goal. That's what we want, right? But every clinical trial that was done was on a strontium medication in Europe called strontium ranelate. In the United States, it's available as a dietary supplement in the form of strontium citrate. There are no clinical trials on strontium citrate. So what they're doing in marketing strontium citrate as a dietary supplement, they're taking the clinical trials from strontium ranelate and they're saying, we're going to say we're as effective. Okay. They may be, they may not be. But to be honest with the research, if you want to do that type of interpretation and say, we're just going to assume it's just as effective, then I think it's important to say, well, then we have to assume that it's just as safe. There are no safety studies on strontium citrate either. So what do we know, first of all, about fractures and strontium ranelate? There are 6 large clinical trials. Every one of those showed, except one, that it reduced vertebral fractures in postmenopausal women with osteoporosis, not hip fractures. Only one of them showed a hip fracture reduction. And so it's doubtful from my point of view. The overwhelming evidence shows that it does not reduce hip fractures, only vertebral fractures. And the amount of reduction in fractures is about the same as you get from Fosamax.
Vertebral versus hip.
Now, what about safety? In post-marketing research in Europe on strontium ranelate, what they showed is that for every one fracture that was prevented, it created a blood clot that can cause a heart attack or a stroke. So for every one person that it helped, it potentially killed another person.
Oh my goodness.
And for those reasons, I don't recommend strontium, especially when you're looking at other nutrients like the MK4 with the D3, with the calcium, and other nutrients showing in clinical trials in postmenopausal women with osteoporosis over 70% reduction in fractures.
That's a great point. I would also like to circle back to magnesium because, to your point, I hear what you're saying from a bone health standpoint. I do recommend magnesium supplementation because of the hundreds of other processes in the body that it does. I have found in my practice that people do not get enough in their diet, no matter how intentional they are. So maybe not from a bone health standpoint can we say there's evidence to supplement, but I do recommend supplementation.
I'm with you 100%. I recommend that if you're taking a good multiple vitamin and mineral supplement, you should be getting a chelated form of magnesium or a highly absorbable form, and it should have a healthy dose of magnesium. Should you take additional, in addition to what's in your multivitamin, I think that's a more nuanced conversation. About half of people in the US don't even get the minimum recommended daily amount of magnesium in their diet. Yes, hundreds of other processes in the body require magnesium. But when I'm talking about bone health, I am focused on those very narrow questions. And then, yes, there are all sorts of other nutrients that may be important for people to take. But I think it's a case by case basis.
Right. And I appreciate that distinction and hear exactly what you're saying. We're talking from an evidence-based standpoint for bone health, specifically in this conversation. But my listeners know over and over how I've said magnesium can be a game changer. And I specifically prefer magnesium glycinate. And so they've heard me talk
Yep.
over and over. So I didn't want to leave this conversation with people saying, Lisa, wait, what are you talking about? You
I agree.
got magnesium.
I love magnesium glycinate. It's in my sleep formula. It's in my
Yeah.
Calm and Clear formula for relaxation. It is amazing.
I love it. And I've just seen it over and over again have life-changing results on people who were deficient and they added it. And I can just see, we can just check off symptoms. Wanted to clarify just for the sake of our listeners, let's round it up with your book. What are some things so if people are like, oh, I have been worried about bone health? Give us a couple of highlights that they would say, "Oh, that is definitely a book I want to check out."
In addition to what I said about educating people so they can ask the right questions and
Mhm.
walking them through creating a holistic bone health program for themselves, it gives the details for people to implement how they're going to change their health in an easy to digest way. Everything I say, the claims that I make, the studies that I talk about, any of the data that I share, everything is cited. Because of that, it's also a resource people are taking to their doctor's appointments with them. Clinicians have told me they prescribed my book and said, this is what we're going to do. You read this book. They're literally prescribing to them. And we're going to walk you through creating this program. And there are other supplements to use that I do recommend. Magnesium can be important. Other ones as well can be important. But the foundation is diet, lifestyle. I also talk about sleep. People who aren't getting enough sleep have a higher rate of bone loss and an increased risk for fractures. I talk about the importance of community and having friends because that is associated, if you do fracture, if you don't have a strong social network, with worse healing from fractures. And so it puts it all together in a way where people can start where they're comfortable and move through improving different areas in their life over time in a way that works for them.
I appreciate that. So you're basically saying take this book and you will personalize your own approach to,
Exactly.
to giving yourself the best bone health. Show us your book. It's in the back there with us.
Fracture proof your bones.
You.
Yep.
Yes. Okay, guys. Fracture Proof Your Bones, a comprehensive guide to osteoporosis. Tell us where people can get it.
People can get it on my website, nbihealth.com. And that's where you can also get a lot of these articles and research. You can learn more about the products that I've created, or it's on Amazon.
Beautiful. Okay, and we'll have the links in show notes. Any other links that, can people find you on social media? How else do they learn more from you?
The best resource for one area to go to very simply is the website, nbihealth.com. All the additional links to social media, my podcast. I do have a podcast that I host, and that's available also on the website as well as all the major streaming platforms.
Excellent. And what's your podcast?
Delivering Health.
Well, thank you for this great conversation. I've really appreciated it, and you've brought so much wisdom and new information to our listeners.
Thank you.
Absolutely. And guys, thank you for joining us today. I will be back to talk with you next week. Until then, stay pretty well. Bye.